My name is Jeff Andrews. I manage the Auckland Community Accounting Program, which ANCAD delivers in partnership with Massey University. I've spent all my working career in the not-for-profit sector, including managing a charity for 9 years. And so I appreciate and acknowledge the work that you all do and contribute to this great sector. This panel presentation is brought to you by ANCAD and in conjunction and partnership with Community Waitakere. Welcome, Mark, in particular. And now it's just a quick promo. One of our panelists, Bronwyn Walters from the Department of Internal Affairs, will be outlining the COVID-19 Lottery Fund, which opens on the 28th of October, which will be relevant to our sector, and will be held here at ANCAD on the 29th of October from 10 AM to 12 noon. So it's a face-to-face session. Come along and hear from Bronwyn about the details. It opens on the 28th of October. We're holding the presentation on the 29th. Look out for more in our e-news that will be coming out. So the format of the session, we're going to introduce the panel members. They're going to speak for 6 to 7 minutes approximately, and talk about and present their views on the impact that they're seeing and the trends they're seeing in their sector and their particular areas. And then they will also talk about what's ahead of us in the sector potentially. So nobody has a crystal ball, but I think you'll find it'll be a very, very interesting session. The order will be Craig, Duncan, Audrey, Bronwyn, Mark, and Deb from ANCAD. We'll finish with that. So let's get underway. A quick overview to set the scene. Now, back in June, and it's some time ago, I'm sure our panelists will be able to update us from there, but the Centre for Social Impact, Philanthropy New Zealand, Huia, and Volunteering New Zealand, they canvassed 1,400 community and voluntary sector organisations and listed the major issues after lockdown as lost income streams, financial uncertainty, immense pressure on operating costs, and balancing and maintaining a level of service on reduced revenue. The survey also found that a sizable number of Māori, community and voluntary organisations took a hit throughout lockdown and beyond. But despite this, and I like to think it's the Kiwi way, they rallied, they moved rapidly, and in some cases did and are doing more with less. Post-lockdown, the survey reveals the sector is in a precarious and a finely balanced position. But it also said that the survey found that there was a high level of effective collaboration throughout lockdown between many community organisations, funders, and central and local government. The challenge now is to collaborate as the sector recovers and rebuilds to address the social impacts of COVID-19. So I'd like to introduce our first panelist this afternoon. It's Craig Fisher from RSM. And just give a bit of background of each panelist, so set the scene. As well as having a significant interest and recognised expertise in the not-for-profit and charitable organisations, Craig has worked in external auditing, assurance, and risk management and governance advice across a range of sectors. Craig is a consultant with RSM, specialising in governance, audit and assurance advice, and assisting with restructuring, growing and developing organisations. He graduated from the University of Auckland with a Bachelor of Commerce and has been a member of the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants for over 25 years. Craig has held a Certificate of Public Practice since 1996. Craig is a Chartered Accountant Australia New Zealand not-for-profit special interest group committee member. He's a member of the Institute of Directors, and also a School of Accountancy Advisory Board member for Massey University. Craig has been chairman of the Fred Hallows Foundation since 2011 and is a trustee of Sustainable Coastlines Charitable Trust. So welcome, Craig, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Jeff, and kia ora tātou, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm coming to you from Whaingaroa, actually, from Raglan, so hence the backdrop here, although it doesn't look quite that pleasant outside my window at the moment. Really difficult challenge here to get across a whole lot of points in 7 minutes, but I'll give it a quick crack. What are we facing with COVID? Goodness me, we're facing a huge wave of uncertainty. And that's the best analogy I think that I can give to it. It's been a challenging time. New Zealand has done extraordinarily well in terms of its health response. However, that's going to have and is having a significant economic response. And that's going to affect all of our organisations. I'm a little bit concerned as an accountant and a studier of economics and an interest in global economics. We've been living in New Zealand in a land of somewhat of fairy dust, I think, economic fairy dust for some time. A considerable response has been provided by our government to organisations to help keep people employed, and that's been fantastic. And you know, we all should pat ourselves on the back collectively because it's all of our money. However, I am concerned that it's meant that a lot of people are living in a slight state of unreality and perhaps don't recognise how significant this financial stimulus has actually been. And this money doesn't come from nowhere. This is borrowed money that someone is going to have to pay back. So the saying, mortgaging the mokapuna, is very relevant here. This is a massive debt that's going to sit on our grandkids. I think it's hard to get your head around the context of how big the financial stimulus has been. But one comment really struck with me, one factoid, when I found out that in the first 2.5 days of the wage subsidy, the government gave out more money than the entire treaty claims history of New Zealand. So the entire treaty settlement claims from start to now to Māori was overtaken in the first 2.5 days of wage subsidy. So that gives you an idea in terms of the quantum of money that's been flowing into our economy. That unfortunately now will stop. So just from that point, and I'm an auditor, I'm a black hat thinker, I unfortunately think we're going to see a rougher year next year than this year. I've been much more worried right from day one with this COVID response in terms of the impact on the economy and therefore the impact on society flowing from that next year rather than this year. That unfortunately is mostly around unemployment, and there's a lot of organisations that are somewhat on life support at the moment and that can't carry on indefinitely. Just for some other accounting stats, because you know I'm the accountant here, I have to give you some of those. We're in recession, folks. Our GDP is 12.2% down. Those are just numbers. Internationally, GDP in the world is 5.5% down. Again, numbers. What does that mean? Well, put it in context, that's 3 times worse than the global financial crisis. So the last financial crisis that the world took, so far we're 3 times worse than that. That means that someone's going to have to pay the piper with this and things are going to get tough out there. Having said that, what I've seen across government, business and charity sectors is more like a tornado than a tsunami. And in that sense, I mean, picture a tornado. Sir Bill English gave this analogy right at the outset, and it's really stuck with me. A tornado goes through a town, and it completely destroys some buildings. It completely munts the ones next door to it. Across the other side of the road, buildings are untouched, completely unscathed. That's what already I've seen happening to organisations from a COVID perspective. A recent example was I was talking to a friend, he was talking about his 2 neighbours. Both neighbours had very successful businesses that they ran. One was an events company. That business no longer exists. The other was a cleaning company. That business now employs 20 more people because of the implications of COVID and deep cleaning required. Last year, you could not have predicted that. They were two very successful businesses sitting side by side. Now one of them's gone. I'm also seeing that in the charitable sector. Some organisations actually are suffering an embarrassment of riches this year. And that's a good thing. They've got a lot of support. Some things are very popular. Mental health has a lot of mental health charities have experienced a significant increase in their support, and that's great because it's something which is seriously needed right now. However, what that also is meaning is that that's taken away from some other charities where they may have had existing support that has been transitioned to other activities. So we're going to see, and we already have seen, quite a lot of inequality in the impact of COVID. Economically, tragically, we're seeing this is just supercharging the inequality in New Zealand. House prices and share prices are going nuts right at the moment, absolutely crazy. And all that's doing is increasing the levels of inequality, which has a horrible societal impact. So that's a bit of a challenge for us. I guess another analogy I'd like to quickly give you is that of a blowtorch. What we're finding through studying quite a lot of organisations is that COVID, as bad a health issue as it is, a pandemic and a horrible thing that it is, all that it's actually done is put the pressure on executives that were already apparent in organisations, and it's putting a blowtorch on those. It's speeding those up. So for organisations that were previously struggling maybe with donor support or getting grants, what they may find is that that might just get a bit harder. If you're having structural issues with your business model or your operational model, again, COVID might put more pressure on that. So a blowtorch is a useful analogy to think about. It's also, and just I guess to end on, it's also a really important crisis that is an opportunity as well as a risk. And for a lot of organisations, especially a lot of organisations in the community and charity sector in New Zealand, they're sometimes too comfortable for their own good, and sometimes don't make the hard calls that they need to make around structure, strategy, process, in order to actually be really efficient and to be able to provide the most impact for what it is they exist for. So, in that cliche, one should never ignore a good crisis, never let an opportunity go past. There are a lot of positives to be taken out of this as well. The fact that I'm talking to you here from sunny Whaingaroa, well no, rainy Whaingaroa, rather than actually having to come to Auckland to stand in a room with you all to be on a panel, is a classic case of this. Technology has been a fantastic boon that's arisen for a lot of organisations out of COVID. A lot of us have recognised how much easier and how much more efficient, actually, sometimes it is to use these technologies that are freely available. So I'm seeing quite a bit of restructuring of organisations who have reduced their cost bases in a lot of cases, and that's fantastic. So really important to take that opportunity. So I'll just leave you with a quick list of things to do to survive, to thrive. Number one, remember your organisation's key focus. This is a time not to be distracted by lots of superfluous things. This is a time to be really focused on why your organisation exists. Trim all of the superfluous stuff. A lot of organisations actually have raced off in all sorts of differing directions, and sometimes this has meant that they're less efficient or less effective, more importantly, than they perhaps could have been. When times get tough, you don't have the luxury of going in lots of different directions. So trim all the superfluous, focus on what's critical. Get really good information. This is a changing environment that we're in. Even things like subsidies and support and funding, it's changing, folks. So make sure you get good information in your organisation on a timely basis so that you can take those opportunities. Lead your teams with confidence if you're in a leadership position, and by the way, everyone is in a leadership position whether they realise it or not. Lead your teams with confidence. People feel very uncertain. This has been a challenging time for a lot of people, and we don't all have the answers, but actually leading positively and with confidence can really help and get people along. And lastly, celebrate success. we need to remember that actually there's some good stuff happening too, and don't be weighed down by all the doom and gloom that's out there, especially from the media that we're bombarded with every day. Do celebrate success in your organisations, even if it's just the little things. Those are the sort of things that keep it all positive and keep it going. So I will stop there because I think that's more than 7 minutes, Jeff.
Thank you, Craig. That's tremendous, and some positive note to end on there as well. So I'd like to move on, and we hope we'll hear from you later in the session. So we'll move on now to our second panellist, Duncan McLaren from Auckland Council. Duncan's the 2IC in Auckland Council's Community Empowerment Unit. He knows the not-for-profit sector very well. Prior to working with Council, he held top management jobs and roles in a number of charities, one a financial capability charity, and the other a non-profit infrastructure support organisation. Also, during his OE, he was vice chair of a grant-making trust in the UK, so he knows something of the philanthropic sector as well. Duncan lives on the North Shore of Auckland, was born in Taranaki and grew up in Tauranga. So welcome, and over to you, Duncan.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks for that intro, Jeff. And hi to everyone out there. It's good to be able to join you and give a little bit of context from Auckland Council. Clearly, being from the Community Empowerment Unit, we're quite invested in the West, and it's great to be able to come and talk about what's going to be happening in Council over the next year or so. So probably support quite a lot of what Craig was referencing. In particular, I agree that we definitely haven't seen the full economic and social impacts of what's going to come with COVID yet. And I imagine going into next year, we're going to be seeing a lot more impact on the economic and social front, which is going to clearly impact on community organisations and their ability to be able to meet the need that's out there. Also agree that the issue of COVID has led to a lot of organisations looking at their structure, and Council is definitely not immune from that. Some of you may have been involved in responding to the Council's consultation on their emergency budget. That was a result of the significant loss in revenue that the Council experienced due to COVID, and that's definitely having a significant impact. There's not many areas of Council at the moment that aren't going through some sort of change proposal, and that means looking at how we're investing and where we're investing. And I think that tornado analogy is very good. So for example, in our area, we're seeing, I'll get onto this in a little bit more detail, but we're seeing a continued commitment from Council to invest in community development resourcing through grants, staffing and other resources. But that's definitely being looked at in terms of where that sits. So for example, in our area, it's being invested in, but if we're looking at, for example, regional art and regional events, they're certainly taking a considerable hit. So for example, the regional public art budget was cut by 70% over the next year. So you're seeing those kinds of things, and in one corner this is okay, and in another corner this sort of section is not okay. I think actually we had a very good, in terms of community development investment, we actually had a really good outcome from the emergency budget. Originally, with the discussions around the 2% or 3% question, we were quite lucky in that particularly local board investment into communities, so that's through their local board work programs, hasn't been impacted. So they've got the same amount this year to invest in their community development work program as what they had in previous years, which is really encouraging. The expectation was that due to budget cuts that we would see boards having cut funding in that area, but the significant amount of feedback from both the local boards, community organisations, had a big impact on that. And I think there amounts of feedback from the community into that consultation really did have an impact on the outcome for our investment. And I think just restates the huge importance of community organisations feeding into council consultation, because it does actually make quite a big difference. So the good news on that side is that the new council strategy, which has been set up to respond to the impact of COVID, very much has communities in need as one of the key outcomes. And it's good to see that stated in writing. They've worded it as communities that need us most, and I'll get a little bit into the definition of that in a moment. What that means is local boards have the same amount of investment to put into local communities through their board work programs. We've retained currently our staffing and budget and resources that go specifically into community development through the Community Empowerment Unit, which is a really big tick and really good for us and for our community partners. And also things like the regional community development grants, that was retained. So that's about a $300,000 funding pool that goes into regional organisations. And again, other areas of grants have been cut, but that has been maintained. So I think that's really positive, actually. Our community development investment is strong still. Can't say that will continue forever. We don't know what the future will hold in terms of economic impact, but currently that's a really good outcome. The focus has changed a little bit. So I think there's a perception that we need to get a little bit more clear on what we define as communities in need, or communities that need us most or need the council most. So 5 sort of key areas which have been outlined at the moment from a regional perspective are youth and tamariki, Māori and Pacific communities, homelessness, digital access, and supporting our town centres. So that's quite broadly looking at supporting our businesses, particularly our small businesses, and also looking at how we can support employment as well. To deliver this, what we definitely need to do is facilitate and nurture more strategic relationships. And I think that's both with community organisations, but also with government. Government increasingly is coming to us as a way in which they can support the delivery of investment that they want to make within Auckland. Also, we need to look at how boards are working together more collectively. So at the moment, some of them can be quite fixed in terms of their investment locally and tend to invest in their local board. But there's actually options to look at their work programs and go, if we worked across several boards, we could leverage the investment we have in our budgets and we could deliver a better outcome with that. Example of that might be greater focus on specific programming through something like the Healthy Puketapapa Action Plan, or what they did out west, which is a really good example in this context, where the 3 boards have merged their work around Māori responsiveness and therefore have been able to leverage their resources in a way which is much more effective to delivering outcomes for Māori. In terms of the future, we undertook a piece of research across the organisations that we fund within the Community Empowerment Unit. I'm just going to try and share that on my screen. One second, here it goes. And I've sent it through as a link as well, so you can see it in the attachment. A lot of this is just the briefing, the infographic briefing that we produced out of it, but a lot of our greater findings actually really aligned with the Huie National Research. But some of the things that really stood out are concerns over long-term funding. There's been quite a lot of questions around use of reserves. We've had some organisations which have approached us looking for funding, but actually have quite a significant amount of reserves. So we've got to look at organisations in terms of look more closely at organisations' resource available in terms of reserves and think this is a rainy day. And actually reserves are for a rainy day. We need to look at leveraging relationships with philanthropic organisations a bit better so that we can get greater alignment in terms of the outcomes from that investment. We also need to look at the types of services that organisations provide and how to leverage that in future. So what was really interesting was the amount of organisations that were able to shift their focus quite quickly, how quickly they were able to get on and connect online, how good partnerships were in terms of the delivery of services, how quickly we were able to align them with Auckland Emergency Management to try and facilitate better outcomes. So there's a lot of stuff that came out of that in terms of how we can actually work together to meet some of the key issues that arose through COVID. There were some concerns that arose there. For example, changes in reduction in funding, which I think everyone's aware of, increased need in the community. So we might be funded at the moment for the need, but the need's likely to increase, and also reaching the most vulnerable populations. I don't think that's a particularly unique concern due to COVID, but it might increase if lockdowns continue, etc. I think that's about it from me, really, and happy to take any questions in terms of point of view of the council. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, that's very encouraging, actually. I'd like to move on to our next panellist, Audry McLaren from Foundation North. Hello for Audrey. Audrey is a community funding manager for Foundation North and was most recently consulting in the sport and recreation sector. Audrey has a broad range of experience ranging from sports facility feasibility assessment to working in high performance sport of Samoan, Chinese, Falkland Island descent. Audrey is a first generation New Zealander born and raised in Auckland. She graduated from AUT University with a Bachelor of Sport and Recreation and from Victoria University in Melbourne with a graduate certificate in career counselling for elite performers in sport. Audrey is passionate about yoga and has a very busy family life with her partner, 2 fantastic sons, and a much loved dog. Welcome, Audrey, and over to you.
Kia ora tātou. Tēnā katoa e te whānau, tēnā katoa katoa. Ko Māngari toko maunga, ko Manukau toko moana, ko Tauwhasau Olonia toko iwi, ko Pulling Mangawha, Roa, ko McLaren toko hapu, ko Audry McLaren toko ingoa. Thank you very much, everybody, for to ANCAD for hosting, and thank you especially to Brian, Yvonne, Jeff and Kerry for organising this, and lovely to be here with the other panellists. From a Foundation North perspective, you know, we have been in the thick of it in terms of very much responding to community need, and so our insights are provided by those that have been working alongside us. We've been working alongside them where they've been doing the mahi, and we've been providing the pūtea in order to for the work to happen within Tāmaki and within Te Takurau. One of our most significant reflections is perhaps the move from being mighty to being a minnow. So I think community had at times seen the foundation as, you know, the pūtea of the foundation as being quite mighty, but in fact, when really the rubber hit the road and community needed support, and we all needed support, our government came in with an amazing amount of pūtea to support us in the short term. So the foundation would need to look quite specifically around where it can support best when we have such enormous support from our government for our communities. So yes, in the short term, we've had, as Craig said, this incredible cash injection into our communities to sustain us in the short term. And then where should the foundation be positioned in the next 12 months and 18 months to strengthen support and strategically assist the not-for-profit sector, and which parts of that. So I think, yeah, there's a shift in perhaps our perception of ourselves, and probably a shift from community and their perception of the foundation. One of our first responses was to look at ourselves, to look at our mechanisms for funding, to look at our decision making, to look at our delegations, and to look at what does trust actually, what does high trust funding look like? So our trustees altered the delegations within the organisation so that we were able to make swift decisions and respond quickly to requests for support that came instantly. And we weren't necessarily prepared, and we had many, as you would know, for those that have applied to us, you know, we have criteria, we have exclusions, we have limitations, we have a whole range of mechanisms that funnel and trim applications for support. Well, those actually, in fact, get in the way of being able to support the mahi that needed to happen in community, because those on the ground were best able to tell us what needed to happen. So we needed to look at ourselves and remove some of those barriers in order to facilitate support out into community. And that has been really quite wonderful that we've been able to do that and be able to make decisions for community funding within 4 or 5 days and have money out. So for those of you who have applied to us, you may know that in the past it's taken 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. We were able to make decisions and have money out there within 5 days. So a lot of learning for us, and long may that continue into recovery, that in fact we are agile and responsive to what community needs. Craig raised some interesting points around some of the realities that organisations are seeing, and I particularly like the blowtorch analogy that things are quickening. So if there were structural difficulties or financial challenges within an organisation, that there is a crucible effect happening at the moment, and we are seeing that also. So we're an organisation perhaps had some financial challenge and we're overly reliant on one source of funding. That is playing out now as being, you know, particularly putting them in a particularly tenuous situation. In our assessment of grant applications, we spend quite a lot of time looking at the governance and at the financial sustainability of an organisation, and we can see where, particularly with finances, there is pressure for organisations. That shift with Class 4 gaming means that those organisations where perhaps they had what appeared to be a varied source of income from grants, when in fact it was perhaps overly reliant on one source being Class 4 gaming. It may have been a number of organisations that were providing that pūtea, but when that whole sector was effectively wiped out for a period of time, particularly within Auckland, we're now seeing that come through in requests to us for support. So, you know, with the we're currently assessing about 130 applications, and almost all of them will be mentioning the financial hardship that they are either experiencing or that they expect to experience shortly. So the foundation is working through how then do we balance our support across the wide and varied organisations and sectors that we provide pūtea to. One of the other things that we've been asking of organisations, particularly when they give us a bit of lead time before their application comes in, and it's really heartening when we see it without asking, is that they're doing some scenario planning. They are thinking about scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. So if there were another lockdown, if there were changes, further changes in the funding landscape, if there are some other seismic shifts that might happen, which now we know more about seismic shifts, we're seeing from some boards some really excellent, not quite strategic planning, but foresight work going on, and that's what we're asking. We are asking for that. You know, if we look at the art sector in particular, it has been so decimated. It has lost revenue from not only, you know, its traditional sources of funding support, but also from ticket sales and participation, and they've moved online. Now, we would hope that we're able to have a vibrant and deep and exciting art sector again, and that we're able to experience it in person. But we are asking those organisations to have scenarios to actually tell us about how things might move for them, and if we were able to fund them, what then would happen if there's another seismic shift in the community. And Craig also mentioned something that I'd like to reiterate, which is going to your core purpose and delivering that well, making sure that that what your organisation sets out to achieve is front and centre, and that the extraneous things, the things that perhaps 12 months ago you were thinking these are the new initiatives because we've identified a gap, or we think that this is where we could provide additional services, to really question whether now is the right time to do that, or in fact to have discussions with others who are already in that space and to support them to do it rather than create new initiatives. And a word that comes to mind and has come to mind for us throughout COVID is, and we all know this is a discussion in the charitable sector around amalgamation, rationalisation, survival, whether we need to have the many thousands of charitable organisations that we have, when now there is challenge for funding, what efficiencies can be found, and I think a fulsome and frank discussion amongst organisations around overlap, efficiencies, effectiveness, that this is perhaps a very good time for us to lean into that, so that we're better able to support the people of Aotearoa and make the most of the resources that are available. Kia ora. I welcome conversation, I welcome questions, and happy to provide my contact details into the chat for everybody.
Thank you, kia ora, Audrey, thank you very much. If we don't have, we're going to have some time for questions, I would hope so. It's important to hear from the panelists, of course, but if you do have some pressing questions, please put them on the chat, and then we could follow those up afterwards. We do have a couple of questions already here. So that was very informative. Thank you, Audrey. And let's move on to our next panelist, Bronwyn Walters from Department of Internal Affairs. Bronwyn is a community advisor at Hapai Hapori, Community Operations at the Department of Internal Affairs. Community Operations leads the department's direct interface with New Zealand communities, primarily by providing information, resources and advice to communities and the administration of grant funding. Their services support communities, hapu and iwi, organisations and networks to identify their priorities and to develop strategies for achieving them. Before joining Internal Affairs, she was a project manager for non-profits in Auckland and the UK. Her background is in post-16 literacy education and community development, and Bronwyn lives with her family in West Auckland. Welcome, Bronwyn, over to you.
Thanks, kia ora everyone. I work for Hapai Hapori, so that's Community Operations, and DIA has 16 regional offices across New Zealand. I work in the Auckland office, and as part of the work that we were asked to do by the Minister during the first level 4 lockdown, and we've continued to do that, is connect in with our community and give feedback to government and other philanthropics about what's happening on the ground in communities. So we've done that work for the last few months, and some of what we've done can be seen as some of the policy responses. The difficulty with being the fourth speaker in something like this is a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So I'm going to hopefully focus in on some things that perhaps is a little bit different here, but just to say, you know, what Audrey said around applications and around funding sources absolutely applies when we are also looking at our applications we're getting at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just share a little bit of the feedback we got from the last level 3 and 2 lockdown that we had in Auckland just a few weeks ago. And the reason why I'm going to focus in on this is because at the moment we don't know when a vaccine will be developed, reach New Zealand and be widely distributed enough for us to actually go back to normal, whatever that might look like. And so it could be that we have to cycle back into lockdowns in and out of different levels. So I want to talk a little bit about what happened in the community and take some good points and some emerging issues that are happening, just to sort of highlight those things. And I'd love to hear any feedback that everyone here has about what was happening as well. So the Pacifica community really felt the impact of the last lockdown. So like in the first one, the Chinese community were targeted online and in person sometimes. The last lockdown, because of who just got the virus first, the Pacifica community really felt there was a lot of hate speech online towards that particular community. And in addition, there was a lot of misinformation shared as well online about COVID-19 and about the Pacifica community. And so that's something that we really highlights, that within this virus, it brings out a lot of anger in people that can be misdirected. So here we saw the real importance of community leaders. So we saw the church leaders in the Pacific community, as well as those groups that have those links within that community, firstly share correct information. They worked really closely with government departments, including the Ministry of Health, which is really key to making sure that community got the support that they needed in terms of testing, but also other support like correct information. I know that Community Waitakere here has done a lot of work out west in making sure that correct information is being shared in the different communities. I know a lot of our ethnic communities have been able to do that as well, translate things. It's just not possible for government. We have over 100 different languages spoken in Auckland. It's not possible to produce information quickly in all those languages. So we do really rely on our communities to do that. In addition, we also saw that our non-profit groups worked in supporting communities. So food is a huge issue, and that, but also in the last lockdown, things like masks and hand sanitizer and things like that were really important to distribute out into the community. We also, so that's just want to emphasize the importance of grassroots. So in the last lockdown, we, the Cause Collective and some of our other partners got some really great feedback. And they found that it was really important that grassroots organisations that work with local people were really the ones that were responding. In addition, depending on who you were, the Cause Collective found that 40% of people who responded to their survey were more concerned in the second lockdown than they were in the first, although some people were less concerned. So you can really see that the different COVID really impacts different communities. I know still in some of my volunteering work, we still have issues with elders not wanting to leave their houses because they're frightened of COVID-19. So you see that there's sort of these long-term things coming out. In addition, no one's mentioned it yet, so I'm going to, we see that with COVID, there's a huge impact on young people, especially those who are year 12 and 13 and have just left school in the last year. The impact is there's not as much work available. It's been widely publicised that our senior students are not going back to schools after lockdown. But there's also other impacts that we've found from our youth networks, particularly in Auckland. I don't know about the rest of the country. So some of young people are going back to school after the level 3 lockdown, but they didn't actually do any study in those 4 weeks they weren't at school. Sometimes it's because they're not very motivated, which I completely get, because in the last lockdown I wasn't very motivated to do very much. But also there are other reasons, like some of them have to look after younger siblings and actually teach younger siblings, and that particularly impacts girls within our communities. So we see again that young people are being disadvantaged because of these lockdowns. We're also getting reports in the last few weeks that there's been, after this last lockdown, a huge increase in youth homelessness. We're not sure why exactly. We're still getting to the bottom of that. We don't know if some kids are getting kicked out of home because there's not enough money, or if we do know that there's some children, so you've got 18 and 19-year-olds have chosen to leave the house in order to help their family, reduce the income for their family and the pressure on families. We're also getting reports about increased sexual violence in young people after the last lockdown. Again, we don't know why, but I think these things just highlight that we talk about the long tail of COVID-19. Well, there's a long tail of social impact as well that we're just seeing. So just to go on to something a bit more positive, I won't go into it a lot, but there is a lot of money and support available from government. And so the Centre for Social Impact has a whole lot of, a 16-page document last time I looked about all the different funding sources. And in addition, the Lottery Community COVID Wellbeing Fund, that fund is really trying to focus on community and social initiatives that increase the resilience in communities. So I'd really encourage groups to look at those funds and look at ways of doing things differently, look at how they can collaborate and work together within the crisis. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Bronwyn, particularly for the grassroots observations. Very interesting, thank you. So moving along, we'll move to Mark Allen, who Community Waitakere, CEO of Community Waitakere. Community Waitakere are co-hosting this with ANCAD today. Mark's the Executive Officer at Community Waitakere, Community Development and Environmental Restoration Agency, operating in West Auckland for over 35 years. Mark is also a local board member on the Waitakere Ranges Local Board and on the Waitakere Licensing Trust. Prior to Community Waitakere, he worked at Auckland Council as a senior local board advisor. He also worked as a strategist at Waitakere City Council. He lives in the bush at Te Hanga, Bethells Beach, with his partner and youngest of the family, is the youngest of the family of 3 boys. So welcome, Mark.
Ora, thank you. Tēnā koutou ki katoa. Ko Mark Allen ahau, no Community Waitakere as mentioned. I'm going to be really quick because I note the time and we want to leave some time there for some questions, etc. So I'm just going to kind of rattle off a few observations. The first thing is globally, relative GDP, debt, etc., we're not as bad as a hell of a lot of other people. And I think the global economy is going through a reset as well. I would suggest also that government support, what was the alternative? We would be now swimming in benefits, etc. That intervention stabilized the system and really created the opportunity for us to more strategically respond. And I think, you know, with the election result over the last weekend, and we can feel some confidence that actually this is a government that understands the value of the community and social services sector and the recognition of creating the space for that to operate. I agree, we haven't seen peak disruption. There is a whole lot more to come. I'm a firefighter in my spare time, which is less and less these days. And that often, you know, that first instance, we all focus on that, but actually it's what happens afterwards. I was involved in the Christchurch earthquake and the follow-up. And, you know, that tail is huge and long. And I would suggest that, you know, the COVID impacts, we need to start thinking about it as a much longer effect and potentially as only the first pandemic of future ones to come. I just want to highlight that, you know, effectively we are in system change. The world as it was is no longer the kind of the bubble that we were in. And we know that, you know, we were living in a bubble, whether it be climate change, ecological collapse, global debt, the inequity, the sheer volume of money and value that is held by very few. We know that that system is not stable and is not sustainable. So we are in really, I think, in a new place of system change. And I think there's some observations about resilience in that. Key is fast feedback loops. So this workshop, things like that are really important. Hearing the information very quickly about what's going on the ground. And I would really encourage any organization, anyone who's supporting it, absolutely getting that high speed movement. I mean, a weird way, the move to digital and online was as a consequence of having the World Cup Rugby. So if you were in charge of running the World Cup Rugby and someone had said to you, hey, by the way, we're actually going to create a far more resilient community, I don't think we would have believed it. But I think we need to be thinking about some of those other things going forward. What are we doing that's actually creating faster feedback loops? Overlapping oversight, having multiple views on what's going on is incredibly important for how to manage and respond to system change. I think the other thing that's going to be important, and this is going to get really hard, is redundancy. Having overlapping things providing services so that if one disappears, we've still got something else to support the system or to support the people who are affected by the system. Now that's going to be really hard if you're a funder, because funders will probably want to move, and I can see this happening already in local boards, to output focused as opposed to outcome focused. And I think we have to watch out for that. And we have to ask the question, hang on, is more and more kind of consistency and specificity actually creating a far more resilient and responsive system? We did some surveying, and what was really interesting was, first of all, it didn't go all Mad Max, you know, like Hunger Games. Everybody kind of thought, you know, we were going to all start eating each other when there was going to be a pandemic. It didn't happen like that. We pulled together. And in the West, you know, our experience was organizations quickly got together online. We started reorganizing. We started to deal with the basics. It was a thing called West Together. It still functions. We created a hub for centralizing information. We responded very quickly to getting food distribution happening. And my organization in particular, our area of focus was around larger families, because to be honest, some of the food parcels weren't really suitable for our larger families. They were food groups that people did not recognize, and they were very small in volume. The other thing that we saw from people was actually overall they were really positive about how organizations had managed to shift to online and working from home, and that most organizations are now looking at that. Now I actually think that that is going to be amazing as far as decreasing overheads if people are out in the field more and actually doing stuff rather than all the cost of all the office space. And part of that, Community Waitaka is working very hard to get another shared office space up and running quickly. One of the things they think that also was the second lockdown, they responded extremely quickly. A lot of the majority of the organizations said their core business had changed as a result. So that shows some flexibility. Organizations responded. A significant majority report that their organization is more innovative and adaptable, and that technology has improved, and they quickly brought on board more technology. In general, a majority felt well supported by their funders. You know, whether it's that Auckland Council decision about, you know, giving the local boards their LDI money, which gave a direct injection back into the community and didn't destabilize that system, or whether it is other funders that are trying to work out how best to respond to it. But in the longer term, that unknownness that I think Craig talked about and opened up, first of all, what's going to happen going long term? You know, and if you're wanting to sustain an experienced team of people and you're still on short-term funding regimes, that's incredibly hard. As my organization, we have 26 different funders. I mean, that resiliency about not having dependency, but, you know, a significant portion of that is Auckland Council as local boards. You know, we're funded by 3 local boards in the West. Not in a connected way, Duncan, maybe something we need to talk about and joining that dots up in those. But I would suggest that we did some studies also on the resiliency of community organizations, and a huge volume of them did not have reserves for 3 months. They were really, really tight. And a number of them, their significant funder was an Auckland Council funding agreement, and they had basically been into a position where they were told they had to spend the money every year and were not allowed to hold on to it. And I think this is an area that, you know, as funders, if you're funding for outputs, actually there's no opportunity for a community organisation to build up a reserve. And I would suggest this is in their policy area that particularly Auckland Council needs to look at. What actually is going to be the sustainability of those organisations? I just want to close out with a couple of very short comments. The first thing was, you know, collaboration is absolutely the answer, and that will help ease through whether it be amalgamations or shared managements or shared governances or shared office spaces. Those are the conversations we need to be having in a collaborative manner. The second thing is we don't need centralized solutions. We need diversified solutions. We need opportunities to be able to tailor make what happens. Community is absolutely the answer in all these things. Outputs, not outcomes. Sorry, outcomes, not outputs. My final thing would be that I think that we need to have another look again about what does it mean to have strong community organisations. I'm particularly worried, for example, of our sports groups. Large assets, loss of funding, what's going to happen to those? They're going to want to come back to the council and start handing those, do some asset transfers over. The ratepayers can't actually afford to pay more. You know, the massive kind of cuts in budgets. We need to have the conversation strategically about what we're going to do about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your frankness and some really good observations there. There's no doubt about it. Quite a tremendous amount of anxiety for all in the sector in working through this. So look, we'll move very quickly on to, I'd like to introduce my colleague Deb Humphreys, who works alongside me. Deb is the coordinator of North Shore Family Violence Prevention Network and the Safer Whānau Project, the child focus group. Deb has worked in the North Shore community sector for the past 15 years. I'm going to keep that one short, Deb, and give you a chance to speak. So, and representing some of ANCAD's work in areas. So over to you, Deb.
Thanks, Jeff. So first and foremost, obviously filling very big shoes today. Yvonne has done much reflection over this space, and I was trying to think what she would say, but I think what is best for me to do is give some reflections on what we experienced working in the work that I do, working alongside family violence, sexual violence providers across. It ended up being during lockdown we convened a collective response across the Waitemata. So I worked closely with WAVES, which is the Waitakere Family Violence Prevention Network, and our partners in Torito Rodney. And what that was about bringing an opportunity together for our service providers, especially those essential service providers that were tirelessly working through lockdowns, to support around how they navigated delivering services in a very, very unique way, in a very different way, in a not best practice way. We shared ideas around how we could do things at level 3 and what we should be doing at level 4, and then what did level 2 look like. And it was really, really interesting to give feedback, I guess, around the North Shore's experiences where we saw increases, sometimes 2 to 3 times what some of our counterparts saw in other areas of the country, because what we experienced is clients reaching out that have never accessed services before, people that needed support with housing that have never even navigated what it would be looking like to be on a benefit. This is stuff that's still the case. There's people on this Zoom that I've been working with and having conversations with from housing, from family violence and sexual violence services, from people that support those with invisible disabilities, children trying to navigate working and learning from home with special needs and learning difficulties and autism and all kinds of wonderful things. And one of the things that I think is really, really important, and Bronwyn did bring this up, which I was very excited to hear, is the impact on our tamariki and rangatahi. The reality of navigating what school and social life looks like online. We need to do some stuff really quickly about keeping kids safer online. There's a lot of work that's been done for a long time around how we engage with our college students, but our primary school students have been in this space, and I think that that's one of the key things that we need to focus on. One of the biggest things I think was a reflection for me in working alongside people is indeed the way we collaborate and work together. There is we've pivoted really well, but there can be a feeling that we need to diversify and we need to become more for our clients. But the reality is I think we need to keep to our knitting in our specialised spaces, and the way we can do that really, really well is working alongside others to acknowledge the complexity of the issues that are surrounding our whānau. So it was really exciting to kind of look at how we could develop better ways of working, integrating our services better. One of the key things, and I think this is really important to note, is that housing was huge. We saw 1,000 people in emergency housing during level 4 lockdown, and those families had to move outside of their existing areas. So then we're navigating services that are contracted for geographical areas and what that looks like when people move across areas. So it was really, really important that we looked at how we could work together to ensure people didn't slip through systems and gaps. And so there has been a working group and a proposal that's been pulled together about how the family and sexual violence services work closely alongside our housing providers, so that when people navigate through emergency housing to the ultimate dream, which is affordable community placements, that services follow them on their journey. And that means longer term investment in services. So that's a big thing to acknowledge. But I know we're running out of time. So one of the things I really wanted to acknowledge is this has been a really unique space, delivering services as a practitioner when you're so uncertain yourself in what's going on in your world, for your children, for your family, for your partner, for your income in your household. So normally we're in a situation where we talk about our cup being full enough when we're working with others. And the reality has been that some of us have had half empty cups when we're trying to still support others. So I think there's a real need also to acknowledge the well-being of our workforce, and to focus on not just the doing that we do, but who we are, the being that we are. And so some of that reflection around our organisations and what we're doing. And yes, our biggest resource in taonga is our workforce. So we do need to focus on ensuring that those that are trying to help others, are doing it from a space of well-being. So those are my reflections. Like I say, I want to cut that short because there's a lot of other people on the Zoom that have some wonderful reflections as well, and give people some opportunity to ask some questions. So I'm not Yvonne, and I'm not trying to be Yvonne, but hopefully there were some insights there as well about what we've been experiencing on the North Shore.
Thank you very much, Deb. Yes, I realise in terms of timekeeping, really good to have some questions. I do have I'm just wondering if the panelists are all happy to stay on for a short time. Lovely, thank you very much. So we just open to the panel. There's a question that we have received, and then we'll open up to the group, the participants. What are some key strategies for the community sector to apply to ensure that our workforce is flexible and adaptable in their response to significant societal challenges such as those presented by the COVID pandemic? I hope the panelists got that one. What are some key strategies for the community sector? So, Craig.
I'd kick off and say that, and it's already been mentioned, collaboration is really important here. And I had an example the other day of 3 food trucks arriving in the same street in Onehunga and banging on the same door, giving out food from 3 different organisations. And the chap who recounted this to me said he just could not believe it. So absolutely we need collaboration. Tied to that, good communication and good awareness of what others are doing is really important. And then tied to that is flexibility. The thing with an uncertain environment is you don't have a rule book, you don't have a playbook to follow. And that requires being a bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable about not knowing exactly what to do and how to respond. So that flexibility is key.
Thank you, Craig. Any other panelists want to add to that? Mark.
Yeah, I just want to take it a little bit deeper, which is that the organisational changes that we need to have then is how do we move information quickly across our organisations, and how do we create systems for sharing that information. We're fortunate, between kind of ANCAD and ourselves, we've got systems in place which we use to share information across our organisations and across our sectors. we've got those backbones. When we did the West collaboration together, we created the hub, and I think Bronwyn mentioned it, to try and have a central place of service information that was what was available where, and quickly getting that out. I think what that also means is for people who are like I put myself as really as an enabling role. I'm kind of like the executive officer in the middle there. I'm enabling my team. My job is also then to make sure all my team has information. So anything I'm hearing gets filtered out to my team. And I think that means then that our role becomes a lot more of a networker, as well as, having kind of oversight and kind of getting a sense of what's happening. So you actually have to change your mindset a little bit about what your role is.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. I just want to acknowledge that question came from Carol Ryan, Chief Executive of Hearts and Minds. We also had another question, which I think we've addressed there to some extent, and that was from Gabriel Peck from Lister Presbyterian Health Trust, and who mentions similar services competing against each other to obtain funding, and what opportunities do we see for more collaboration amongst organisations for similar purposes. And I just, it really is, keeps cropping up time and time again, and wonder if panelists have anything to say, respond to that. Anything to add? We have already discussed it, haven't we?
Yeah, it seems really imperative, and I think from our perspective in CEU, it's really important for us to look at doing that as well. So we're looking at ensuring that like-minded philanthropic organisations are working with us to ensure that our outcomes are having the biggest impact for the amount of money that we've got to put into the sector. So as much as community organisations delivering services should be looking at opportunities to merge or join up, us as funders also need to look at doing that too.
Yeah, I just want to comment on, I'm worried about that. When we put it in a framework of competing rather than collaborative, we set up a situation where effectively we're striving for monopolies. And I'm worried about us. I think we really need to think about actually what is the best set of services that I need for delivery now, for going forward into the future, and that will be resilient to further shocks in the system. And that's really challenging if you're a funder, because you do have to make sure your funding is used well. And sitting in the local board hat, that is the challenge. We're busy trying to think about, do we spread the putia wide, or do we actually target? And it's a hell of a challenge.
Yeah, great point, Mark. And can I add to that? I think we suffer in New Zealand about being organisations of generalists, and this is right across, commercial sector as well as charities and not-for-profits. I think all organisations need to get really clear on what they are uniquely best at, because we've got a lot of crossover that's not always happening actually that efficiently in terms of service provision. And that's part of the answer. Well, it's part of the reason why I think we've got so many organisations in New Zealand for the size of the population that we actually have. I have to say that this is something that the sector as a whole finds very hard to deal with, and we suffer from the tyranny of niceness. We operate in the community sector because we are driven by a need to do good, a desire, a strong, moral imperative to do the right thing by community. But sometimes because of that, we don't ask the hard enough questions of our organisations, and we tend to try and follow what we've done in the past rather than what might be needed for the future.
Great. Now, I'd like to open it up to, conscious of time, to any of our participants who may have a question for the panel, or a specific question to a panelist. Here's your opportunity. Okay. All right. So we've had those. Thank you for those two questions that we did have, and I'd just like to thank those who joined our Zoom this afternoon and our presentation. Thank Waitakere, Community Waitakere and Mark, and in particular our panelists for giving your time and expertise. There's some really good information that has come out of today, and we will be recording it and distributing it to our networks.